The technical aspects of building your no-code app are so important. You have to have a reliable, scalable product that you can bring your users onto and efficiently grow. So the technical pieces that go into that are really, really important. But a lot of entrepreneurs get really caught up with the technical parts only. And what ends up happening is they don't really have a strategy or a plan or any sort of process in place to help them figure out what technical components they should build and when they should test them and how, and really just how to pull the entire no-code app together so that they can launch and scale successfully, both from a technical standpoint and from a strategic standpoint. And we don't want you to go down that path of, maybe coming out with a really big and robust, lots of technical features included in your app, but with no real plan or no real rhyme or reason for why you've built what you have. And so today we're going to go through a really straightforward and easy way to help you scope your app. And this is going to show you what technical pieces you need to build and when, how you should break those apart and kind of approach them in a chronological, really logical order. When you should inject different testing phases, how you should go about that. We're going to dive into all of that. And make sure you stick around until the end because we also have a training that actually goes much further into this. And so this is going to be kind of like a preview of that training. And this is also what we take our own clients through as well. And we found works really well in helping you jumpstart your app, actually create a solid plan and roadmap for yourself. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to dive into this. Now, there are three things that you need to identify before you start putting together this simple roadmap for yourself. The first thing is what we call your key user, sometimes your primary user. And this is basically the user who is going to be most dependent on your app. So if your app has multiple user types, and many do, you're always going to have one user type that is going to be relying on the app more heavily than the other. Now, if your app only has one user type, then this is really obvious. Your key user is your only user type. But let's say you have some sort of a two-sided app or a marketplace app. Let's say you're creating a job board where one user type is the company and one user type is the applicant. Well, in this situation, we would say that your key user is the company because companies are naturally and probably going to need to hire a lot more frequently than applicants will be needing to apply for jobs. Normally, that's how it works. Companies are going to be the ones to pay for the software. They're going to be the ones to pay to post a job, whereas the applicants are only going to come on, maybe once ever in their lives, maybe once every handful of years or whatever it may be. And so we would say that the company is the key user. So you have to first define who that key user is. And then you want to identify your primary problem that you're solving. Now, your app can solve lots of different problems, and chances are you've been thinking about and planning your app for potentially years, maybe even a decade or more, and you probably have lots of little problems in mind that it's going to solve. But at the core, it needs to be geared towards solving one main underlying problem for your users. This is the primary problem. This is a one core problem where if this is not solved, then nothing else matters. So all those other little things that your app is going to do or solve, those just aren't even relevant unless this single core problem is solved first. Okay. And then you need to look at your primary outcome. This is really just the flip side. Okay. So you solve that primary problem. Well, what is the primary outcome? Okay, what is that outcome on the other side that your users are looking for? So you're looking at the before and the after in a really simplified way. What is the core reason for why your app exists? And what is that core user that it's going to serve? Okay, so once you have those three things, then we're going to move into a scoping process that we like to use. And we're going to look at, let's see here, I'm going to make a better line there. We're going to look at 4 different phases. And we're going to talk about the different types of testing that you'll do in between each of these phases. But first, we're going to look at how you can kind of break your app's development and launch down into phases. Now, what you can do before you start this and what you may find really helpful is to take 30 minutes, an hour, however long it's going to take you, and just write out a full list of all the features that you've envisioned your app having. Every single little feature. So all of the main features are what we call bucket features and all the sub features within those. So, let's say you have a booking feature in your app. Well, a booking feature has lots of features in and of itself. You might be able to add custom times to the calendar or block out custom dates or send custom invitations or whatever it may be, right? So all the little features that you've envisioned your app having, taking the time to just get those out of your head and just write them down can be helpful before you start this. It's not for everybody because sometimes it feels like something that you can't move past because you have so many of them in your head. And so you can try it. If it's taking you too long, then you can just kind of jump into this. But regardless, we're going to take those features, whether you have come up with them before or if you're getting them out of your head as we go through this, we're going to break them up into 4 different phases. Now, we use something called the Moscow matrix to segment out the phases of our development. And Moscow is an acronym that stands for must have, should have, could have, and won't have. So we have must have, should have, could have, and won't have. And there's a caveat here, and that is at least for now, okay? Won't have at least for now. It's not won't have ever, just for right now, okay? So taking all of those features that you have envisioned, whether they're in your head or they're on paper, you're gonna start to place them into these different columns. Now, what you're gonna place into the must-have column are features that must be in place in order for the key user to solve that primary problem and achieve that primary outcome. Okay, so that's why we identified these 3 things to start. These up here, right, they go directly into your must-have column, okay? What are the features that must be in place for your key user to solve that primary problem and achieve the primary outcome? This is a slimmed down version of that full scope app you have envisioned. They're the must-have features. You absolutely have to have these features in place for that problem to be solved. Now, what I'm not saying is that these features are going to allow you to monetize the app and market the app and bring in lots of referrals and all of that. No, right now we're just focusing on the features that must be in place for your key user to solve their problem. Okay, so we're thinking about your user here and not just your business plans, your monetization plans, or anything like that. Okay, we're just thinking about your key user. Now, once we move into the should have column, this is where we start layering in some extra features that will help you potentially monetize the app. This really depends on some specifics of your launch plan, but it's going to help you actually bring those users on board now. So bring the users on board and have them consistently use the app. So what I want to do now, I'm going to bring this up and we're going to talk a little bit about your initial testing phase, because that's going to make these different columns or segments make a little bit more sense. So you'll go through a number of different testing phases as you start, as you build, and as you launch your app. It's not just build everything and then launch, and that's one phase, and then you're out in the world. We break this down in a really granular way so that you can move forward efficiently and not have to guess on a lot. Okay, so the first testing phase we add in happens right here, in between your musts and your should haves. Now, you might be thinking, if your must haves only focus on that key user and they only solve that first problem and you're not thinking about monetizing yet, then how can you test that, right? Well, the thing to remember is that, again, you have multiple phases of testing that you're going to want to go through. And the first is pretty simple. It's called alpha testing. And this is where you really are just testing the app's functionality. You're not testing for user adoption. You're not testing your marketing. You're not testing any of those later components. You're just testing the core functionality. Because remember, in the must-have column here, you're looking at features that must be in place for your key user to solve that primary problem and achieve that primary outcome. Okay. If those features are not in place, nothing else matters. And thus, if those features do not function properly, then nothing else matters. None of the pricing tiers matter. None of the design really matters. Nothing else matters unless those must-haves are in place. And that's why we inject this first round of testing right here. But it's just basic testing. You're not launching into the world and putting out some, a product that you can't actually bring users onto. You're testing for that core functionality from a technical standpoint. So we want to make sure that when you do start bringing your users on board, which happens very soon after, that it's going to work for them and that you're going to be in a position to start scaling the app rather than having to wait to figure all of this out until you launch and then realize, oh, I need to go back and fix a bunch of things or redo a bunch of things. That's not the position that you want to be in when you're bringing users on board. So we put this first round of testing here. Then we move into your should haves. And now these will make a little bit more sense for you. This is where you start layering in those user-facing components that enable your first beta users, your early adopters. These features enable them to come on and start using those must-have features. Now, if you have multiple user types, then you'll be adding some additional features in here as well. But usually this is where we're looking at things like payment, adding in your payment processor, setting up your payment plans, or whatever it may be. This doesn't have to be anything extensive or robust, because the next phase of testing that we're going to go into is the beta testing phase. And remember that you're launching a first version of your product. You're not launching the same thing that when you look at other apps that you use on a daily basis that have been out there for 10 years now, right? You're not launching that. You're launching your first version. And so you're doing your testing and you're building and your expansion incrementally. Okay, so we add on the should haves. Now the should haves are the features that should be in place in order to start bringing users on board and to allow them to really benefit from the app, to allow the app to start solving their core problem. So again, not your full scope app, right? Not that full scope vision that you've spent the past 3 years coming up with. We're still looking at a pretty slimmed down, a pretty contained and concise product. But this is where we can now look at our beta testing. So once you have those should have features in place, we're going to come right here and we're going to start bringing on our first waves of beta users. Now, the way in which you bring on beta users, there's no one size fits all approach. It depends on the app. It depends on you and your goals. It depends on your market. It depends on your pricing. It depends on a lot of different things. But what doesn't change is that this is when you can start doing your beta testing. Okay, now try not to think of this as some big grand opening or this massive launch where you're trying to build up tons and tons and tons of buzz. Right? Think of this as a soft launch where you're bringing on your first wave of beta users and you're testing for adoption. So back over in this first testing phase here, we're testing for functionality. Okay, but when we get to the second round of testing, this is where we start testing for adoption. So now your beta users can consistently use the app. How are they adopting it? Are they adopting it into their day-to-day lives? Is it helping them actually solve that primary problem and achieve that primary outcome, right? Are they staying on board? Where are they falling off? This is where you have lots of conversations with your beta users. You intake lots and lots of feedback and you start refining the product and you start improving it, you start changing it, maybe you start cutting certain things. Okay, that's what happens in this phase. And then you move into your could haves. Now, to be clear, the sections over here, right, on the right side, your could haves and your won't haves, at least for now. These will change. No matter what you put down here now, they're going to change. As you go through your must-haves and your should-haves and your alpha and your beta testing, and after you go through those, your could-haves and your won't-haves for now, they're going to change and evolve. So what we're going to do right now is you're going to take all of those features that you have in your mind or on that piece of paper, and you're going to put them into the appropriate column. But you are going to commit to keeping an open mind about those. You're going to tell yourself that they're not set in stone because you're building your app for your users. And that means that ultimately their feedback should dictate these later features. So no matter how badly you want them in there, remember that it really depends on your user feedback. So remember that these are going to change. Now, you could have features. This is where we start to see nice to haves, right? Your nice to have features. So these, while your must haves and your should haves are those features that they really need to be in place in order to solve that core problem and achieve that core outcome. Your could have features are things that they're not mission critical to solving that core problem. They're just nice to have. Maybe they make solving that core problem a little bit easier or more convenient or more enjoyable, right? They're just nice to have. So they're little extra features. Maybe instead of just letting your users of your project management app create the projects and create the tasks, maybe now you start to let them bookmark certain things. Maybe now you start to let them put color categories on different things, or maybe now you start to let them create tags and organize in their own ways. You start to look at a little bit more personalization maybe, or more user experience touches, things like that. So again, none of those things would hinder the user from solving that core problem. With a project management app, they can still create the projects and manage the projects, but they're just nice to have features that make it a little bit easier or make it a little bit more convenient or enjoyable. So any feature that's a nice to have, it's not mission critical to solving the core problem. It just makes it better in some way. That goes in your could have lane. Okay, now at this point, once you're adding these features on, you're already having beta users use and adopt your app. Now, the way you kind of roll the app out, and instead of just saying launch the app, That's more so how we like to refer to it, because when you do these kind of series of soft launches, it's more like a gradual rollout rather than this, crossing the one single line launch. So you're adding these features in as you're taking feedback from your beta users, and you're kind of expanding the beta user groups. At least that's how we like to approach it. So maybe you start with a small group of beta users and you have them come onto the app and they continue to use the app. And then you start bringing on more beta users and you start expanding that first group. And then you start bringing on more. And so, with every change and iteration and update, you're bringing on more beta users. And eventually you really are just, you have your app that's now launched. You've rolled the app out, and at a certain point where you feel comfortable, you're going to change that from being in beta to just being a launched app, where you're bringing your regular users on board. During that time, you might change pricing. You might have done testing with your beta users on that. You might change messaging, marketing. You're definitely going to be changing features and making tweaks there, right? But you're just kind of gradually rolling out the app. So you'll be adding in those could haves, those nice to haves while you do it. And that's another reason why it's so important to wait on these, is because that feedback that you're getting from your beta testing, it's going to dictate a lot of these. Okay, so that's what you put there. And then we get to our last column here. And these are the ones that are going to change the most. And honestly, these are the ones that most of the features you have in mind now are probably going to fall into, or this is the column rather, that most of those features are probably going to fall into. Your won't have features, at least for now, are the features that won't really come into play until you have a certain number of users on board. So until you have a certain number of users to make the features effective, you'll hold off on building them. All right. Think of forums, right? You can build a forum into your app, or you can build some sort of community into your app. But until you have a certain number of users on board, it's not really going to be effective. There aren't going to be enough people using it. Think about review features where, maybe you have companies, or think about a site like Upwork, for example, where companies can leave reviews for freelancers. Freelancers can review companies. In the beginning, you're probably not going to have enough users on there for the reviews to really be that helpful for other users. You can add them on, right? But are they really going to serve the purpose they're intended to until you have a larger volume of users on board? Probably not. Okay, so start thinking about that. Is this feature going to really serve its purpose when I only have X number of beta users on board, for example? If not, then put it in the won't have column, at least for now. And like I said, all of the features here are going to evolve. And so you might go through a portion of your testing, or you might start receiving beta feedback that tells you to take a feature from here, and move it to here, or, whatever, move it earlier in your beta testing. And that's okay, right? That's why we're keeping an open mind about these. But you will likely find, at least most people do, that a lot of the features you have in mind right now, they're going to end up over here. Okay. Now, it can get really complicated if you make it complicated. The only reason why it becomes complicated, or why it feels complicated, is if you start thinking that the things you're putting down on this are set in stone. Okay, so remember that none of this is set in stone. This is really just a way for you to take all of the information, all of the ideas and the plans out of your mind and get them into a rough plan to get started. Because once you do that, once you list out, starting with up here with your key user, your primary problem and outcome, As soon as you know that, listing the features out into these columns becomes a heck of a lot easier. And once you have them listed out into these columns and you have an idea of where and how your testing should take place and the purpose of each round of testing, the outcome you're looking to achieve through those rounds, it becomes so much easier to actually focus on the technical components that should be receiving your focus right now instead of spreading your attention really thin and you know kind of building everything at once and having a really cluttered workspace, having a really cluttered app that it's just not that cohesive. We don't want that. We want a more segmented plan, but we also want to remember that it will evolve, it should evolve, and it's not set in stone. So if you can even sit down for 30 minutes or an hour and go through something like this, you will have so much more clarity on how to move forward with your app, how to roll the app out and actually get it live, actually have users' hands and eyes on it, getting feedback. You're going to have so much more clarity and you'll be able to move a lot more quickly. So I encourage you to go through an exercise like this. Now, if you weren't going through this exercise during this video, that's okay. Like I mentioned at the start, we have a free training. It's a 75-minute workshop where we actually do a deep dive into this. And we actually have a scoring system that we've set up as well, where you can take all of those features that you have in mind, whether you've listed them out or if they're still in your head, you can put them through a scoring system that will help you more correctly delegate them to the correct columns in that must have, should have, could have, and won't have layout that you saw there. So if you want to join in on that, we go through this process and we also dive into, some of the tech components. We talk about Bubble, of course, and really just how to move forward with your app strategically. You can head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop and sign up for that. Again, it's completely free and it's really just an even deeper dive into this. So as you move forward with your app, I really encourage you to go through this process, get a clear head, and move forward strategically, efficiently, and correctly. All right, I hope that was helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.